Hello, folks, and welcome to The Farm, a podcast dedicated to culture, parapolitics, and high weirdness in all its many forms. This is your host, Recluse, aka Stephen Snyder, the longtime curator of the Visa blog and author of the recently released A Special Relationship, Trump, Epstein, and the Secret History of the Anglo-American Establishment. If you like what you hear here today, be sure to check me out at visupview.blogspot.com. That's visupview.blogspot.com. And procure a copy of that book and my other works at the Farm's official store, which is at thefarmpodcast.store. That is thefarmpodcast.store. And please consider signing up for the Farm's Patreon. You get 2 additional full-length shows per month. That's between 3 and 4 hours of bonus material with exclusive gifts and content. All right, so making his first appearance on the farm today is the commentator S90. Those of you who have listened to John Brisson's We've Read the Documents are probably familiar with S90. Thank you for dropping by today, sir.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about some high weirdness and some, serious social engineering going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Today's show is also going to be a fun one on top of everything else. It's more on the pop culture side, but we are going to delve into some, as you said, some very interesting means of social engineering. But specifically, we are going to get into the history of alternate reality games in fiction. Now, this is actually quite a fascinating topic, as ARGs have been used both in the marketing of film and TV, but also in storylines and as the inspiration for shows. Sometimes they come full circle, starting off as ARGs, becoming documentaries, and finally becoming fiction. It's kind of the reverse of the cybernetic culture research unit's notion of theory fiction, which I explored in an earlier episode with them in Berger. So maybe here we're talking about reality fiction for ARGs. By the way, in case of for those of you out here who are wondering what the heck I mean when I say an ARG, that's the abbreviation for alternate reality game. You'll probably be hearing us say that a lot today, so just a little pointer there. So, as with all things related to ARGs, the line between reality and fantasy has been blurred in unpredictable ways. And the process of exploring this will hopefully bring some new perspective on some celebrated films and shows. I think you guys are going to dig it. So let us get going here. Okay, Ong's Hat is really considered to be the first ARG. It was launched in 1988, but didn't really take off in force until the early 90s. Interestingly, the first movie to depict what we would now consider to be an ARG came out in 1997. It's called The Game and was directed by David Fincher. Now, this was the middle film in a trio of pictures that Fincher made during the 1990s that established his reputation. The other 2 were Seven and Fight Club. Both of those movies are heavily loaded, to put it mildly. Fight Club looks more and more like a recruitment film for the alt-right every day. And if you subscribe to David McGowan's notions and Program to Kill, Seven takes on an especially ominous light. But sandwiched between these 2 is The Game, which I've always felt was colossally underrated and overlooked, and even more so now. So what can you tell us about it, S90?
Well, it's funny, really, because at first I wasn't aware that all 3 of these films were made by the same person until you'd mentioned it to me. And I have to highly encourage everyone to watch it. It's quite old, so it shouldn't be too difficult to find. And I really would like for people to put themselves in his shoes and try to share the experience with him and consider how you might think and feel in or after that situation. It's an important frame of reference when we're going to be talking through all of this about what does the experience do to the player. And so when you look at all 3 of Fincher's little films here together, you can see a coherent outline in their message that I wouldn't have seen if I hadn't known they were all by the same person. At first glance, The Game feels much like a revelation of the method or the mechanism by which they will enact their plan.
Yes, could you give the listeners like a rundown right quick of The Game too, because it's not as well known as Fight Club and Seven. I don't know if everybody like knows the plot line, by heart like they would with those films.
Okay, yeah. Well, and it's a little bit vague to me. I didn't watch it out of interest in ARGs. I watched it just because I was interested in conspiracy films in general, and I've only watched it once. But when you mentioned it, and when I saw it in the show notes, that I thought a lot about it. And rather than, so basically Richard Gere's Richard Gere. I can't even remember the main actor in this film at this
Michael
point.
Douglas.
Michael Douglas. Thank you. He's living a normal. He's basically living a normal life, and he ends up living through what appears to him to be a real experience with, guns and chases and, real honest mystery to it. And it I don't even want to spoil it, because if people haven't seen it, it's a worthy experience in and of itself. Needless to say, it's called The Game for a reason, because someone is playing a game with him, kind of, and that's how it factors into the alternate reality game. It's when the line blurs between fiction and reality, and in some cases it's not clear whether it is a game or whether it's real, and we'll go through that with the different examples of the different ARGs as time has gone on. But it serves as sort of the first time an audience was exposed to this idea of an experience, a scripted experience in your real life, living in a movie, living in a book, right? Living in the entertainment rather than just watching it or observing it. And this is really the evolution of entertainment that we're seeing. You used to be able to read a book and you would have to imagine the characters in your mind. Now you can watch a movie, and then now you can live in the movie if you were in the game. And so these trio of films, though, I think it's interesting that as a trio, the game is sort of telling you the mechanism it's a revelation of the mechanism or the method, which would make Fight Club a revelation of the plan, to deconstruct this debt-based society, which I don't think is necessarily a bad goal, but of course how he goes about it in the film is violent and, not the way it should be done. And if then you think about Seven is perhaps the most accurate, because given the attitudes of certain groups these days, it seems like a revelation of the motive, which is almost purge the sinner, essentially. And I might get a lot of flack for this, but in fact, it could be said about both extremes, both political extremes. They've been manipulated with targeted ARGs, kind of like The Game, and which is complex and refined propaganda with the goal of, beating the other side and changing society for the better, which for both sides, left and right, involves a deconstruction of the financial system as it currently is. So it's almost, like I said, it's like a revelation of the method, a revelation of the plan, and kind of a revelation of the motive. And he's given us all three that are being, and these are back in the 90s, and we're only seeing this happen to society now. So I don't know, he was ahead of his time there, that's for sure.
It's kind of interesting, especially like in the case of Fight Club. I mean, I suppose there are maybe elements of an ARG in Fight Club as well, but you could say that as maybe one that's directed more towards maybe a younger audience, probably more of a left-leaning one, whereas the ARG in The Game clearly is kind of designed for a very affluent, probably a little bit more conservative-leaning clientele. And in the case of The Game specifically, I mean, there's almost this an air of like a sense of it's being used to kind of toughen up the ruling class, making sure that they're up to snuff, so to speak. And another interesting thing too, I wanted to point out with The Game, that really stood out to me when I rewatched it recently, was the personality profile that they do of the Michael Douglas character very early in the film when he first, signs up for the game. It's kind of an ongoing thing throughout the film, actually, as to whether or not what he's experiencing is a game or if it actually is, reality or some combination of the two. But all of this is preceded by a very intensive personality profile. I mean, I think he spends almost an entire day with people, with the company that's putting on the game, going through a variety of tests and so forth. And that's something that, we've mentioned a few times before addressing the ARGs, but certainly how how very useful data can be generated by ARGs for personality profiling, or potentially vice versa, how personality profiling can be used to generate a very accurate ARG for the player. But in a Cambridge analytical world, that is certainly something to keep in mind.
Yeah, because in the game it was very analog, it was very paper and pencil. Now they just have to buy your data from whatever person is, you've given it to and clicked I agree, and then they can sell that data for $10 to whoever, right? And if the ARG company comes knocking, you bet they'll sell if they're looking to buy, right?
Oh yeah. Well, you can only imagine too what that kind of data would be worth now in 2020. I mean, especially since, like I
Mm.
said, I mean, they're mostly kind of geared towards an elite clientele.
Data is certainly undervalued currently, but that's so. See, they'll overvalue necessities like food. They'll deal with things like inflation and whatnot, supply chain problems. They'll raise the price of important things for us and lower the price of important things for them. They'll say, "Oh, data's not that important. It's not valuable."
Oh yeah, which is total nonsense. I mean, data is
Oh,
everything now.
absolutely.
It's everything. All right, so one film frequently cited as an influence on the ARGs that would come out in the 21st century is the Blair Witch Project, which came out in that pivotal year of 1999. And of course, film buffs know there were a lot of major films that came out. Fincher's Fight Club was another one often cited from 1999. But anyway, some people behind Blair Witch have even gone on to make their own ARGs. So, what's your take on Blair Witch?
Okay, so it's interesting too. First, but just before we get to Blair Witch, I wanted to mention that in the history of found footage, the quote unquote the first film that's sort of cited for this is something called an Italian film called Cannibal Holocaust. Terrible title, but
Oh, I've heard of
this
Cannibal Holocaust.
well, have you heard the story about how all the copies of the film were seized and turned over to the authorities,
Okay,
and he
that's
was accused of it being a snuff film and that the actors had actually been murdered for the
okay.
film?
Yeah,
He
that's the
was
context I heard of it in. Okay.
right, and he was proven innocent for this. He had all the photos. He told the actors, and he actually had made the actors sign a non-disclosure agreement not to go on television or do interviews for a year after to actually promote this theory that they were murdered for the movie. And then he had to back himself up in court and say, "Oh no, they're really alive. Here, you can talk to them."
It's
And he got
it's
off.
kind of
So
like
that's
the Nine Inch Nails video from the early '90s from the I can't remember the song. It was off the
oh,
Broken album, but yeah, they ended up doing like I think a brief FBI investigation on Trent Reznor because the video
really?
basically shows somebody being dismembered
Wow.
by this like torture device.
Oh,
Which
that's
again,
horrible.
it was nonsense, but I mean, it probably did a lot for the marketing though back
Well,
then.
right. And you know what's really funny? It's funny that you mentioned Trent Reznor because he's going to pop up again later, as is his epic marketing. So we'll
Oh,
get to that. Don't
interesting,
worry, we'll get
interesting.
there. And so that was. I just wanted to mention that that was sort of the origin of found footage as a film genre. And before the Blair Witch Project, there was a company called Wizards of the Coast. Some people might be familiar. They make a card game called Magic the Gathering.
Oh yes, yes. They started doing D&D later too, didn't they?
Yeah, they actually, and that's funny. That will come up too. Hold your horses. We'll get there. But so in 1996, Wizards of the Coast launched a proto alternate reality game called Web Runner to promote their Netrunner card game. And it gave, players some puzzles to solve to get the secret data. And it was the first online game tied to a product release, making the front page of the New York Times technology section. So that was interesting. And then now we'll get to Blair Witch. And I'll be honest with you, I don't remember the Blair Witch Project because the moment I saw the trailer as a teenager, I knew it wasn't something I really wanted in my life. And so at first, but I had to do research for the show. So first I found out that the film's trailer was leaked on a website called Ain't It Cool News on April 2nd in 1999. Now just remember Ain't It Cool News for later. The film was screened at 40 colleges of the United States and built to build word of mouth. And a trailer for it played before Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. That's not the first time Star Wars will come up later again. We'll see here. So the two directors, the first one I couldn't find very much about, Daniel Myrick. He seems like he's had a fairly lackluster career after this. However, his partner, Eduardo Sanchez, has done a lot. He's directed episodes of the show Supernatural, of the show Lucifer, Taken, a few different things. So he's had a fairly good career after the Blair Witch Project. But let me just pull up my notes really quickly here. There we go. And so, yeah, he also has another film called Altered in 2006. And in the Wikipedia description for Altered, it says the plot is an inversion of the standard alien abduction formula where four men abduct a lone alien, planning to wreak revenge on the invading species. And it says right here, in its early stages, the film was entitled Probed and was intended as a comic homage to the work of Sam Raimi and Troma Entertainment. That might tickle some of the listeners' spidey senses if they've ever heard of Troma before. I don't want to get too far into that and distract us, but
Dude, you know I love
that's,
Romeo and Juliet, man.
well, there you go. So, in retrospect, it seems like and with the Blair Witch too, a lot of it was analog as well. It was the handing
Yeah, I
out
meant to ask
of
you about Blair Witch 2. That's a nice
lost
I
missing
actually
people
think the Blair
flyers.
Witch 2 is one of the
Sorry.
most underrated movies ever, actually. I mean, it got I mean, it's not great, don't misunderstand me, but that movie was trashed so much when it came out, and I actually thought it was a rather clever sequel, all things considered.
Interesting. You always have to consider, where the vitriol, the hate for certain things is coming from, and look and follow it back to its sources. But so the Blair Witch Project, again, it seems like it was the first kind of attempt to do sort of a breadcrumbing for, to get people to get themselves involved in it rather than having to be lured into it, right? And it was for the genre itself to go straight to what some might interpret it as Satanism, it's unfortunate, and it's not, it happens a few times, as we'll see down the road, right? It's a common theme through this genre of experience of entertainment, right? As Satanism and the occult often plays a big role. And it's often very accurate, and a lot of it seems well researched. So you have to wonder about the people making them as well, right?
Oh yeah. Well, on that note, too, I mean, another thing to point out with Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows, of course, whereas the first Blair Witch was kind of structured like, essentially trying to appear as a documentary. The second one is a straight up fictional film that, openly acknowledges at the beginning that the Blair Witch, the first one, was, a fake. There was no Blair Witch or anything, and one of the main characters who had only, I believe, recently been released from a mental institution was doing tours, essentially to rope in gullible tourists looking for their own Blair Witch experience. And then things start getting a little weird. But one of the things I wanted to point out about that was the director of Blair Witch 2, Joe Berlinger, I believe. He's most well known actually for directing Paradise Lost, The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills, which I'm sure you're quite familiar with, sir.
I'm not actually. This is all news to me. Again, I said, I did not let. I
Oh,
just didn't
really,
feel like I let it
know,
into my life, honestly. Pardon?
really, you didn't know Paradise Lost? That's the
No.
documentaries about the West Memphis 3, the first one.
Oh, yeah. I really do have an aversion to all of this. I'd prefer to be writing science fiction and consuming comic books and whatever, relaxing. But unfortunately, that our times kind of demand we look into this. So no, I I try to limit as much of that stuff. Like the West Memphis 3, I'm vaguely aware of what happened there. I didn't know there was a movie about it, but
oh yeah, well that was what really kind of raised awareness about it. It was kind of like a fairly unknown case when it initially unfolded, and then this documentary came out, and they of course famously got Metallica and a bunch of other big bands to contribute music for it, which really kind of turned it into a national cause. But yeah, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but there's a lot of interesting things about the West Memphis 3 case. I mean, of course, if you've listened to William Ramsey, and that type of thing, I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy theories about, the fact that the kids actually were Satanists. It's complicated, so I don't want to get too sidetracked on that, though.
Fair enough. Yeah, it does sound quite. I'm gonna have to look more into it. I'll probably ask John Brisson that we've read the documents for a little bit of a rundown on that one.
I mean, essentially, of course, the main kid, Damien Eccles, has since become a major proponent of Thelema. So that's
of course
in certain circles a lot of credence to the notion that the kids really were into Satanism and they really were guilty.
Well, there's another thing to be said here, though. It's kind of what's happening to a lot of the centrists in our world right now. If you're not. It's sort of like that Anakin Skywalker Sith thinking. He's like, if you're not with me, then you're my enemy. And, most generally normal, calm people know that's not necessarily true, but both sides, both extremes are kind of treating it that way. And so if someone says something and then one side calls them a name and says, oh, you're the other side, you do that enough and maybe someone will start to think, well, maybe I am, like literally calling someone that kind of ends up creating them as well, right? So it's a bit of both ways.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, it's definitely complicated on that, but who knows? Maybe one of these days
Yeah.
we'll do a West Memphis 3 show. I want to tread carefully with that because that's a subject people get really passionate about, and I have a tendency, I think, to
And
piss
I am
people
in
off
no
when I
way an
talk about
expert,
that.
so I can't comment really.
All right, so let's talk about another film from the pivotal year of 1999, and that would be Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. Do you see elements of
boy.
ARGs in that one?
Okay, so at first I would have said no. But when you look at Hartman's journey through the film, I definitely feel like it has the ARG feel to it. But then I realized that's just good and proper storytelling, which reflects on the nature and the mechanism that how the ARG interacts with the consumer, the person being taken in by the story, teasing that same mystery gland that kind of shivers every time someone mentions Atlantis or aliens, right? And I think that's really all there. The only ARG aspect of Eyes Wide Shut is that it shows what a good story is and what a good mystery is and how you pull someone in to the mystery. And that's kind of the mechanism that ARGs use on people in real life. That's really all that I could see there. But Kubrick himself does factor into the next topic of conversation you have.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So, on that note, the first commercial ARG officially was The Beast, which was launched to help promote Steven Spielberg's AI artificial intelligence film. Of course, that's kind of fitting because this project was originally conceived of by Kubrick. And the man certainly loved a novel marketing ploy. So, can you take us through this one, S90?
Absolutely. So this is a bit of a bigger section here. First of all, I just want to point out, the imagery again is evoking antagonistic response from some people who might interpret this in their own way, right? It's this repeating theme of, Satanism and evil, essentially, right? It's antagonistic. To be frank, like I feel it's quite antagonistic the way they've named them. And anyway, but that's just an aside. That's a personal note. It's interesting to note that the Beast ARG started when in April, Harry Knowles of Ain't It Cool News received an email from someone calling himself Clavius Base, which is a reference to Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, the moon base where they discover the monolith. So again, you've got Ain't It Cool News again. You've got some callbacks to Kubrick here because he truly did start the AI project. He abandoned, and actually during the working of his film, he was debating between using CGI and using standard analog models. And he courted both Steven Spielberg for his CGI models and George Lucas, George Lucas's company Industrial Light and Magic that made the Star Wars films by using tiny models and good cameras, right? So he was trying to pick which one would help him film AI the best. And it kept stalling and it kept stalling and it kept stalling, and he didn't really know what to do. And then eventually he sort of paused it while he worked on Eyes Wide Shut. Then he died. And so Steven Spielberg kind of picked up the torch, and CGI had improved greatly because of Steven Spielberg and his work on that. And as a side note, I want to point out that Steven Spielberg's uncle, not a lot of people know about him. He was instrumental in the creation of the computer. There's a channel called Housatonic Live who does an excellent segment on the Spielberg's family's involvement in the creation of the computer itself. And so it's just interesting. You'll see this quadrangle almost of companies and sort of people that are involved in this whole ARG scene from the beginning until the present. Excuse me. And so the Beast ARG is It says, although the Beast ARG does not directly reference the AI artificial intelligence movie, the film's producer Kathleen Kennedy stated that the game's intention was to develop the film's fictional setting and create a foundation for a series of games to come after later, created with Microsoft and Xbox. Okay, so the Beast ARG had 3 primary players: Jordan Weissman, who was the I believe he was like the project head, Elon Lee, who was the designer, and Sean Stewart, who was the writer. Now, we've got to go and look at each one of these 3 individuals and what they did before and after the Beast. Jordan Weissman got his kicks at the beginning making video games, and his company was bought by Microsoft. Fine. That's kind of how he got involved in this, because it was a cooperation between Steven Spielberg and Microsoft to make AI the film and the games and the ARG in between them. So Jordan Weissman made games, got purchased by Microsoft, and starts working for them. Elon Lee worked for Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas, working on Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And then he went to work for Microsoft and started working on The Beast while he was there. And Sean Stewart was brought on as a writer for this. He was a science fiction writer before, so he was a good fit for them, although I don't know how he fits into the Microsoft field that we've got going on here. So all 3 of these people produced The Beast together, and then afterwards they seem to have enjoyed working together, because they all got together and founded a company here, 42 Entertainment. And when they worked at 42 Entertainment, they produced the next big ARG called I Love Bees, which was another Microsoft creation to promote one of their biggest video games coming out, Halo 2. Some people might remember that, might have heard of that out there. So they did that, which was the second most influential ARG, and far more widespread than the Beast, because it was targeted at a wider audience. It was way more accessible, calmer, no satanic overtones, none of this stuff, right? And the fan base for it had already been established. There were already millions of Halo fans, and then this coming to them was, so they knew that if you target an established fan base, your ARG will take off much faster. It almost can't fail. So they made the I Love Bees thing after that. Oddly enough, Jordan Weissman, while he was working on the Beast, he started a company called WizKids that manufactures Dungeons and Dragons figures, little figures you can paint. That company was, excuse me, his company WizKids, just before he started producing I Love Bees, he sold WizKids to Topps, the trading card company most people will know. And the 2008 financial collapse destroyed Topps, and it was purchased by, let me just check my notes right here. Sorry. Topps was purchased by Madison Dearborn Partners and the Tornante Company, which is owned by Michael Eisner of Disney. So he bought the card company. Anyway, they claim on Wikipedia that the WizKids company shut down after this, but I know for a fact that's not true, because as a fan of Dungeons and Dragons, I know they're still making figures under the brand of Wizards of the Coast, which was that company that made the first commercial ARG for their card game. Okay, so it's just things are just going around in circles as I'm researching this, right? So anyway, they made 42 Entertainment. They did I Love Bees for Microsoft. Sean Stewart, the writer, wrote some Star Wars novels in between as well, another Star Wars connection. They then founded a company called Fourth Wall. They all left and found another ARG company called Fourth Wall, which anyone who's a fan of theater knows that the fourth wall is the camera. It's the invisible wall between the viewer and the cast on the screen, and you're not supposed to break the fourth wall and look at the audience and address the audience. If you're an actor, it's considered, breaking the illusion of the show. And so for the ARG company to be called Fourth Wall is very telling, isn't it? Anyway, so it was, I looked into the company that they left. They left 42, and 42 didn't shut down. And looking into 42, I found another person who was involved in the Beast, someone called Susan Bonds. She is the president and CEO of 42 Entertainment. She began her career in 1980 as an industrial engineer for Walt Disney in Florida. And then after 7 years there, she went to Lockheed's Advanced Development Project Skunk Works in Burbank, then returned to Disney as a creative director for Disney World and Disneyland, creating rides for them. So I don't know how you go from being a Disneyland ride engineer to a Lockheed systems engineer back to a Disneyland employee. Don't know about that. But anyway, Bonds in 2003 joined Wiseman, Stewart, and Elon Lee in launching The Beast, and then in the launch of 42 Entertainment. Then, of course, the three of them left and created Fourth Wall Entertainment. But she, while running this company after they had left, she produced the ARG Year Zero for Nine Inch Nails, which was hailed as by Rolling Stone as the most innovative promotion scheme since the leaked sex tape. And of course, Nine Inch Nails star there says, oh, it was all part of the plan. It was all planned. Don't worry, right? Trust the Nine Inch Nails plan. Anyway, so it was interesting to see the same people keep popping up over and over and over again in this field, and they keep switching hands, and but it's always the same people.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And of course, there's also the the Marilyn Manson connection to Nine Inch Nails.
Yes.
And Manson, of course, knew all those guys from Disinformation, the website, which really just had a lot of overlap with the people behind the ARGs as well.
Yeah. And so just to wrap up our little section on the Beast here and the people who were involved in it, after 42 Entertainment and Fourth Wall Entertainment, they've all gone and done their own separate things. Weissman's gone back to making video games, trying to revamp his Mech Warrior franchise that he created in the 90s. Elon Lee has created a card game called Exploding Kittens, which is the most backed Kickstarter ever or something. And Sean Stewart is working with a company called Magic Leap that makes virtual reality headsets, or as they call it, mixed reality. It's for doctors to have three-dimensional representations of a patient's innards above them so they can see what they're doing. And it seemed like it was going well, but all the articles from 2020 from Verge and Bloomberg, they seem to be reporting that the company's in ashes and that the technology was a fraud and that they were liars. So it's interesting to see that the careers of these people have kind of curved back in on themselves, and they're back to where they all began. And the technology or the systems that they created, this entertainment system, has been hijacked by, Disney and a bunch of big companies. And so the last thing, just a quote about why Steven Spielberg's version of AI was never believed to have been as good as what Kubrick had planned. And the quote is that Spielberg
kind of goes without saying.
Well,
is there
absolutely,
anything that Spielberg could have possibly done that would have been on par with Kubrick?
Well, I think he's a great director, and there are a lot of good things he's
done.
I mean, he has his own
knock on
style.
Spielberg's abilities or anything.
Yeah,
but to me, it's like there's Stanley Kubrick, maybe David Lynch, and then there's everybody else.
And I agree, but and this was the quote. The quote was, Spielberg cannot live up to Kubrick's darker side of the future. And I think that's absolutely correct. Kubrick's version of that would have given people pause, and people might have actually stopped and had an original thought about how they feel about this. Whereas with Spielberg, it was fancy entertainment and a fun game, right?
Yeah, and a certain
sneaky
romanticism.
So you've got Spielberg, you've got Lucas, you've got these three guys who basically pioneered and created this whole system, and then got it taken away from them, basically piece by piece, forced out of the industry. I wanted to point out one last thing, though. The company the last company that they founded together and again left, Fourth Wall Studios, in 2011, they received funding from a Patrick Soon-Chong. I can't pronounce his name correctly, and I apologize. He's a South African-American transplant surgeon, billionaire businessman, bioscientist, and media proprietor. I thought this was interesting. He's the inventor of the drug Abraxane, which is famous for its efficacy against lung, breast, and pancreatic cancer. Abraxane almost reminds me of Abraxas, the Gnostic, the name of the Gnostic Archon god. It reminds me of the Luciferase talk, people are talking about what's going on now, right? Why are they always named weird things like that with these people, huh? It's a little bit suspicious.
Well, I mean, these guys like their little references and so forth that they
Yeah.
like to drop here and there.
Well, psychopaths like to leave clues, don't they?
Yes, indeed, they do.
So, and so anyway, let's go on to our next little area here, because this still just ties into what we've been talking about.
All right. So, and one thing I should point out here, right quick, one of the things that we've been kind of describing here at a few points with Blair Witch and so forth is what is known as transmedia, which was in fact kind of an outgrowth of ARGs. But essentially, it's where you use multiple platforms to promote a storyline. Okay. So, one particular individual who's made heavy use of this format over the years is a certain J.J. Abrams. I'm sure many of you out there know exactly who I'm talking about. Um, a lot of projects that Abrams has been associated with over the years have used a transmedia approach. Obviously, Abrams hasn't been directly involved in a lot of these, but certainly his production company, Bad Robots, seems to have a thing for it. But one show in particular that stands out, and also an early recipient of this approach on a massive basis, was Lost. Now, this show went to great lengths with the transmedia approach, creating fake websites, crafting tie-in books, linking classic books into the storyline, etc. And in some ways, it was inevitable, but it, ultimately had its own ARG as well. Can you get into some other interesting aspects of Lost for us, S90?
Ah, yes, Jar Jar Abrams. He's the joke of the directing world in many ways right now for his work on Lucas products for Disney with Kathleen Kennedy, who you might remember I mentioned earlier as let me just go back up here. All right, she's the film's producer for AI artificial intelligence. Oh, what a shock there. So Lucas, Disney, Spielberg, Kennedy,
Kennedy
all these
produced
people.
a lot of stuff over the years too.
Hmm. And so, so coincidences aside, some of his older work, like Lost, is quite compelling. I like it because it's not loaded with the common tropes, It's Lost didn't have the black cube, but it did have certain things, right? It had the conflict between the two brother spirits, Jacob and, well, I don't think they called him Esau in it, but you may as well have, right? There's a few different he has those tropes in there, but they're cloaked better. I think he's quite good. Don't get me wrong, I dislike what he did to Star Wars. He ruined my childhood, but he also gives people a lot to think about with his stuff. And I think the interesting thing about the difference between the Beast approach and the Lost approach was the Beast was very targeted, very narrow, and it had the end goal of linking games to the movie. Whereas this was the Hollywood machine constructing hype, right? This was different. This was kind of like what Microsoft did with I Love Bees, creating hype for Halo 2 back in 2004. So, and there's something to do with this company, Bad Robot. I can't remember it off the top of my head right now. Skip ahead here. Got all my notes here. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, aside from him using the tropes and him utilizing the transmedia, the intertwining formats, there's not much to say. I mean, you got to go watch it. You got to go just see it for yourself. There is one thing I will note that's very weird about it, is there is still an unresolved mystery about a certain website, which I literally will not name because it's an ARG that I've directly seen be bad for people's mental health, so I'm not sharing it. But it began with a countdown that linked to the numbers from Lost and continued on after the show ended. And so no one even knows if it was related to Lost or if it was kind of hijacking Lost. Nobody's really sure. So there's even, and that being my first bad experience with an ARG really changed my opinion of these as well, which is what informed my opinion of the game and why I said, when watching and listening and learning about this stuff, you have to think, how would you feel about some of these experiences and the blurring of reality One of the later ARGs we're going to talk about, one of the famous things that one of its proprietors says is we create and gift experiences. What if that experience isn't wanted? What if the person you're gifting the experience to can't handle it? You know, it's a lot to consider. And a lot of the responsibility, the responsibility has to fall on the person who's doing it, doesn't it? Or who else can you blame? You're going to blame the mentally ill person for being taken in by an internet game that, they probably shouldn't have been exposed to in the first place. So that's a bit of a darker side to it, maybe, but a lot of what JJ does in his work is dark too. Cloverfield, especially, bringing back the found footage genre with giant monster horror, merging the Japanese giant monster fear, almost the fear of something bigger than you. I mean, deep down, a lot of people know that, when you're eating the chicken wing, the only reason you're able to do that is pretty much because you're bigger than it. Let's put it that way. And so the idea of a monster bigger than you coming to eat you is quite a primal fear, when there were saber-tooths and stuff that would come and kill us, right? So I think we have this innate fear, and they know what they're tapping into when they're making all of these things. And so far through all of this, you can notice too the ever-moving improvement of the immersion into the experience of the player. Spielberg's work on CGI and Kubrick's distaste for it until he saw Jurassic Park and what it could really do. Even with George Lucas and his analog hard models, they ARGs use all of this. They're not limited to just one type of filmography, one type of music, one director. You can have anything. There's almost no limit, right? Like, because you're making up a fantasy universe and imposing it on the real world, which, like that other company, that holographic company, they called it mixed reality, right? Some people who play Pokemon Go, they'll call it augmented reality. Who cares what we call it? But it's the overlaying of something over top of reality, whether it's in your mind or on a screen. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. And so there's an ARG is really not much more than reality baiting. It's like tickling people's mystery gland, saying like, ooh, there's a little mystery, gets you sucked in, and then you start having maybe some fun, or maybe you're scared. But it really is preying on the psychology of people, which, I mean, that's marketing. It's everything in our world these days, right? It's just something that's been refined over the last 50 years and is used to being wielded against us, right? Against our will without us even knowing it most of the time.
Absolutely. Now, how about Westworld? I mean, that's definitely another show that came out of Bad Robots, and I mean, there were a lot of ARG influences on that, to put it mildly.
Well, and that itself is almost a show about an ARG. It's almost about it, like, because it's this fake park. You're visiting a fake park, and when the experience will end, and you're not in danger when you go into that park in Westworld. And so, as much as it relates to ARGs, and like there's many different ways an ARG can be structured. You can make it absolutely clear it's for marketing, like people knew Isle of Bees was for Halo. They just knew, because that's just how it was. Like, it was in the trailer for Halo, and everything was to do with the lore, and everyone knew already. And there's, you can go into them, not know, like we'll get into the Institute later, which is the prime example of the I think the first example of where it was no longer clear whether this was a game or a marketing ploy or something real. And I think it's been building to that point. We'll get there. We go full circle with this. We go all the way back to Cannibal Holocaust with this at the end. We'll see. So Westworld I see it kind of like Eyes Wide Shut. It sort of shows as a general outline, but it's not really revelatory. It's not going to. That's more about, I don't know, like, that had more to do with data and programming society, like what we were talking about earlier, right? Controlling people by knowing exactly what buttons to push, which ultimately that's an ARG anyway, right?
Well, I did find one of the aspects of the third season I found really compelling was, how crime essentially had been structured
Hmm.
onto like an app. I mean,
Yes,
and
and
it's
that was
even
run
made
by
to
the
look like,
AI.
yeah, yeah, run by the AI. And I mean, it's, compiled partly from personality profiling, to target certain
Yeah.
individuals for it. But it is almost sort of made to look like Grand Theft Auto or something like that. So I found it sort of
Yeah.
interesting in this, kind of dystopian future. Like the ARG format has almost been, used to effectively control crime. Uh,
Well, and that's because the AI, obviously, any sort of even a human ruling elite will know that there's always going to be a dissident part of the population that can't really fit in. So you make another space for them rather than letting them carve out their own space, right? So it's made this app, it controls the crime. It can even use the crime to, say it wanted someone gone. It could just pretend to put out a hit on
yeah, it's
someone and get rid
essentially
of
putting
them.
them towards constructive ends, even, the
Yeah,
only
exactly. It's
caution.
utilitarian. It's objectivism almost, right? It's very AI, of course, right? I'm sure that's what AI would do. It wouldn't try to crush, like just like in the Matrix, how the robots let Zion live out of utility, not out of empathy or compassion, but simply out of utility, right? You have a use to us in this form, and we know that if we try to put you back in, you just won't take it, and you'll cause more problems. So at least this way, you're benefiting us, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. So yeah, so the Westworld, I think is it's interesting that it comes from that same crowd, but I think it's focusing on a different aspect of this whole game that's being played with us, which that's ultimately what it is.
Oh yeah. All right, so let's get into a show that you tuned me on to, which is Utopia. It started out as a British series and was later remade into an American version by Amazon. So, what's your take on them?
All right, so I saw the BBC version first. I recommend anyone who's going to watch it watch the BBC version first and then the Amazon version, because the Amazon version is not only a watered down version, it's not complete. The second season isn't out, so there's no conclusion. And it's been thoroughly sanitized for everyone's current feelings, the Amazon version. It doesn't really detract from the story, honestly. The story is essentially the same, but a bit less finessed, a bit less elegant than the British version. Um, anyway, the show itself is about a a mysterious comic book that's been found. The first chapter of the comic book is widely distributed, and everyone thinks, "Oh, that's cute. What a weird comic written by an insane man who died in an insane asylum." Okay. Well, the second chapter appears, and it leads the characters down a journey to stop a cough from occurring across the world, and the subsequent um, medicine that you know people are supposed to take when that happens, right? I don't want to use any key trigger words here on your show, sorry. um, but so it's, again, without spoiling too much, it has that elements of, it's like they think it's an arg until it's not, until it becomes real for them, which is the opposite of what happens in our world every time, which is where people think it's real and then it becomes fake, right? And so it's timely, it's related to our current situation. It's got a little bit of interesting information here and there, but as outside of the comic book, it's really not got a lot to do with args. There was no arg for the show. The show was canceled before it could be finished, unfortunately. But I did have an interesting thing to give a shout out to Houstonic Live again. He discovered a cover for the February 2009, volume 15, number 2 of the Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Its cover has some interesting artwork, very stylized artwork on it that is almost a mirror image of the artwork from the cover of the Utopia book. Let me just put these in the chat for you, and I'd like you to see these. I haven't shown these before. So this is the cover here of the Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal. Copy this. It's very small. I'll try to paste a bigger one to you. I apologize for doing this on the fly, everyone, but this is kind of just a surprise here for Stephen. So that's the cover of the Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal. And then there's the cover for the Utopia project from this TV show. They're almost identical. They're almost an inverse image of one another. Are you able to see those?
Yes, as I got them up here. By the way, wasn't there some kind of comic book that what was it? The European equivalent of the CDC, the EU's version of it or something it like put out?
I hadn't heard of this, but I'm not surprised. I thought it was strange that this 2013 show, I'd seen it before, that Houstonic yesterday showed me this Journal of Infectious Diseases with some very racial and stylized art on the cover. Let's be honest, right? Like,
oh yeah,
you know, pretty inflammatory art, but it's almost a mirror image of this art from this later television show about the same topic, about the same kind of disease. You know, and in the show, the art is drawn by an insane guy in an insane asylum admitting to his crimes, and the other is a actual cover of an actual book stamped with a government logo from our real life.
yeah.
So you know.
By the way, what year was it that the BBC version of Utopia came out in?
I think it was 2013. Let me just double check here. Excuse me. I believe it was 2013. Utopia, okay. BBC.
Yes, it seems like that kind of time frame, 2012, 2013, was like a big year for some of this stuff.
It was originally broadcast 15th January 2013 to 12th August 2014. Yeah, and it was just right after the 2012 had ended and the world hadn't ended, right? And everyone was like, oh, yes, nothing bad can happen to us now, surely.
I don't know. I'm still not convinced that the world didn't actually end with Y2K.
I know. The more you look back on it, it's like, how did we spiral out of control this quickly, eh?
Yeah, trust me, things have never really been the same since the 21st century started.
And I want to make a side note here. For all the flack I give him, Alex Jones had an interesting quote, and I like to mention this every time I go on a show, because if someone can get me this quote, I will be indebted to you forever. Jones once said, and you know, again, I don't believe most of what he says, and I think he's an agent, but he once said that around the year 2000, folks, the satanic old guard split off from the newer transhuman young Zuckerberg types, you know, something like that, essentially implying that there was like an old occult version and a new transhumanist, technologically oriented version. And the more we see the conflict between the GOP and the Democrats and globalist, atheist, communism versus nationalist, Christian conspiracies and Q and all this stuff, you can almost see those two sides emerging, almost as if he wasn't kidding. Just an interesting side note. Maybe someone else has heard him say that. Maybe I'm not the only one.
Well, as the old saying goes, even a broken clock is right twice a day. All right, so do you want to touch on Dysotopia here for a minute? Even though it's not officially related to Utopia in any way, it really does kind of seem like a sequel. It's kind of strange.
Well, and you have to wonder, what it makes me think is more of, where is all of this coming from? In Utopia, there's an elite eyes wide shut type party, but there's no weird stuff going on there. It's just people talking about, well, we could sterilize the mosquitoes and get rid of malaria. Yes. And then the main character walks up and he's like, but then 8,000 species of frogs would die. You idiots have no idea what you're doing. And then this is the insane guy who makes the virus that sterilizes humanity. So I have to wonder where these ideas, even though dystopia seems like, where are all these people? Where's Fincher? Where are Spielberg? Where are these people getting all these ideas from that always seem to just line up so perfectly, you know? What meetings are they going to? Aside from that, I like looking at the bigger picture honestly, and looking at the contrast between the two, and the contrast between the three Fincher films, and the ever increasing technology being laid into the ARGs. It's just, I like to, it's clear what direction they're taking us, right? And that they're programming everyone to get ready for this. What was that Birds movie that came out? The new one, some bird thing, and it was like COVID 23 or something. They know what they're doing.
All right. So, do you want to briefly touch on the ARGs related to Stranger Things and Mr. Robot?
Yes. Okay. These ones I know slightly more about, and I've got some interesting things. So we'll call this the high strangeness, the high weirdness zone for you. First of all, I wanted to point out that Mr. Robot, aside from being an awesome show, it's distributed by a company called Anonymous Content. Anonymous Content is run by Stephen Aaron Golan. He's an American film and television producer. And it's funny because it's the other Propaganda Films is another company that's related to Anonymous Content, and Propaganda Films was founded in 1986 by Steve Golin and David Fincher. Interesting, right? And so these are, again, you can see these same people pulling themselves through this whole narrative through 20, 30 years of ARG history, right? There's Fincher again. And so you've got Anonymous Content and Golin's links to the company Propaganda Films. And I thought this was funny, the way they worded it. It says, as the name suggests, the production company Propaganda Films was founded with the intent to focus on the medium of films. And I just have one question. What about the other word in that title? The propaganda part. But hey, we'll just pretend that didn't, let's just not ask the hard questions here, right? So what was interesting about Propaganda Films is that it eventually was sold to Polygram, a British company that was meant to be the British competition to Hollywood. And they were later sold to the Seagrams Corporation. You may remember the two Seagrams daughters are in jail or something, or in trouble for that NXIVM cult. And
even before that, they had also, at least one, I think she was actually an in-law, married into the family. But anyway, some of the Brofman money had ended up sponsoring, what's his name, the unicorn, Ari Einhorn.
Yes, interesting.
Ari Einhorn. Yes. That gets on all the stuff with the Nine and Huarik and all the insane stuff with the New Age movement. But it's funny how that stuff kind of comes full circle.
Well, and speaking of coming full circle, the Bronfmans, right? The family that owns the Seagrams Corporation, they share a lawyer with Alex Jones. It's funny. It's funny small world, right? How many people have I mentioned in this whole show so far? A dozen, 2 dozen, maybe. It's a really small, little tightly knit clique going on here. I wanted to comment on the Mr. Robot ARG was clearly separate from reality, very clear cut. It was very entertaining, very fun. Another example of what got me into ARGs and what I love about them, sort of like with I Love Bees as well. And I want to give them a shout out for a really wholesome, fun experience that helped build the TV show. And and the show itself, Mr. Robot itself, is clearly a 21st century retelling of Fight Club. Just replace bombs with Bitcoin, basically. You've got eCoin in the show. It's JP Morgan coin or Fed coin that we're going to get in real life. It's all, and the ending of Mr. Robot, I'm not going to spoil it. There was some teasing for 2 seasons about some kind of quantum super collider and the ability to rewrite history and bring back the dead and stuff. And there were a lot of beautiful theories about how the show would end. And then we suddenly got this one episode, and the final episode just felt like the second last episode ended with flashing to white, and you think, oh, here the device is going off. He's going to time travel or something or whatever. And, none of it. It was a slapdash, and it was a slapped up ending that didn't fit the direction the whole show was taking you. And then people say, "Oh, it's art. You didn't understand. This was always his plan." I really don't think it was. I think he had a whole nother season probably planned, something to do with the Mandela effect, because it had even said that there was a fifth season planned and that it was cut down to 4. So what was the content of that fifth season? The ending is obviously not the real ending. And there was obviously something to do with quantum computers. And so that was a very interesting, predictive, conspiratorial show, very, and the first scene itself is bait for any sort of internet sleuth. Pretty much it's him tossing photos on the table of some pervert and saying, "I've got all the documents and I've called the police on you. I'm hacker man. I'm the hero," right? Like a lot of people on the internet want to be, right? With all the previous, we could even call some of them probably ARGs, with that restaurant in DC and whatnot. I won't.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting too. I mean, it predated the whole Pizzagate thing and QAnon as well. Kind of like a proto version of that.
Very close to it, yeah.
I
So
was just looking up this Steve Gullen guy. Yeah, it's really interesting because the producer too. I mean, he had worked with David Lynch on Wild at Heart. Did Being John Malkovich.
Lynch and Twin Peaks is beautiful too.
Being John Malkovich, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind,
MK Ultra, Spotless Mind, yeah.
Lord of Illusions. That's quite a good. The last film actually Clive Barker directed. There's a lot of interesting stuff in that. He, besides being a producer, Mr. Robot, he was also a producer on True Detective as well.
Ooh.
So yeah, he's definitely got some really interesting credits here, from what I can tell.
As a side note about bad endings, season 3 of True Detective set everyone up to believe not only that they were going to bring back Matthew McConaughey, just as, whatever, star power, but they really made people believe they were going to expose something like they did in season 1. And then they purposefully let everyone down at the ending to almost slowly disinflate people and be like, not every conspiracy is a conspiracy, right? That's really what season 3 felt like. It was a joke.
Yeah, it seemed like it was a sellout. I mean, certainly I think in response to, at the time Q really getting big and that type of thing. I personally, I always thought the second season was really underrated too. I mean, a lot of people hated on that, but I definitely preferred the second season to the third one, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. And I just wanted to continue on with the high strangeness really quickly. Speaking of Bitcoin, from the last thing, what we were talking about with Mr. Robot, there was another ARG called Perplex City, and it was a internet fun game. Didn't purport to be real, but it did say like there's a real treasure in your world from our dimension. You can find it. And what you had to do is you had to buy these trading cards from their website, collect them all, solve a puzzle, and then get a code. 2 of these cards remain unsolved. One of them asked participants to solve the Riemann hypothesis, which is a mathematical equation with $1 million reward just for solving it, let alone the $100,000 gold cube you would acquire by solving the cards for the game, for the ARG. That's fine, whatever. Nobody solved that. The second card, this was interesting. The second card was a photo of a man, and it just said, "Find me." And the man's name, and I just want to point out, this ARG took place 1 year before Bitcoin came out. And the photo of the man on the card, and it just says, "Find me." And his name is Satoshi. And I wondered for the longest time, now, was that someone trying to find, was that really, is the BTC creator's name really Satoshi? Was it really him or something? And then in doing research for the show, 20 minutes before I called in, apparently someone found him. And it has absolutely nothing to do with Bitcoin. So that let the wind out of my sails a bit. But happy resolution, I suppose, right? He's not missing anymore. But it's an interesting how long an ARG will go on, even after it's dead, long dead. The company that made Perplex City is a company called Mind Candy. Well, now they operate a children's entertainment video game app store. And they had a game called Moshi Monsters, which is defunct because of Adobe Flash dying. But I thought it was interesting looking into them. Michael Acton Smith, OB&E, meaning he's Order of the British Empire. I believe that's what it means. he's basically knighted. And he's the founder of Calm, a meditation space company, the founder of Firebox.com, and the founder and chairman of the children's entertainment company Mind Candy, the creator of Perplexity and Moshi Monsters. He's been described by the Daily Telegraph as a rock star version of Willy Wonka, and by The Independent as a polite version of Bob Geldof. And then on the page for Moshi Monsters, it says, the game was created in late 2007 by Michael Acton Smith and developed by Mind Candy. Does he sound like the person who's designing a kid's iPad app game?
Yeah. Just in general, would you want somebody designing a kid's name who was described as any kind of version of Bob Geldof? I mean,
Yeah, and it's just like, and this is a thing that happens a lot in business. If you look at Microsoft, Bill Gates gets all the credit, but he did very little of the work. He didn't invent Control Alt Delete, for example. Someone else did, and then that person was a humble person and basically said, "Oh, I give the respect to the boss where it's due," and he was like, "Oh, I'm glad to take it. Thank you. Haha. Now take the, I won't get into how much I don't like him, but." I think a lot of it is a lot of these creations that are credited to people like this game being credited to, the polite Bob Geldof. He didn't make it. Someone else did, and he took credit for it. These people are weasels. Most of them, right? Anyway, so speaking of weasels, we'll go to Stranger Things now. Stranger Things had its own little ARG. But before I mention that, I want to mention that someone is actually conducting the Stranger Things experiment in real life, shooting high energy particles at quote unquote immovable objects to try and see if a signal comes back from a mirror dimension. So, that's comforting, right? Science run amok. Yay. Yay. Our world, huh? But and as a side note of that too, in Stranger Things, one of the things it gets absolutely right, terribly close, is that the people running the experiment on the aliens and the portal and stuff, it's not the Army, it's not the Air Force, it's the Department of Energy. And if you want an example of how influential the Department of Energy really is, everyone's heard of Los Alamos National Laboratories. They've probably heard of Oak Ridge National Laboratories, or what are the other ones? Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, where UFO research goes on, or where railguns are made, stuff like that. Every single one of those facilities has Department of Energy employees stationed there to provide federal oversight on their work. And I might add, every single one of those labs have become owned by a single lab called Battelle Memorial Institute. So it's all of the top secret national labs are under the oversight of one company, Battelle, and then further oversight over all of them by the Department of Energy. So, people always looking into the Air Force and Roswell and stuff. No, look into the Department of Energy. That's where you'll find something interesting. So anyway, the Stranger Things ARG was just a simple login on a little old looking app and play a small game. There's nothing really special. Again, like Mr. Robot, it was nice and concretely separate from reality. There was no joking around, no tricking, no trying to sell you anything. Just a fun experience that was kind of funded to promote an already paid for product, right? Whereas other ones like Perplexity, you had to buy the cards to play the game because it's not free to run these things, right? Like, website, real estate, employees, all this stuff costs money. And even though a lot of people take the experience for granted, they don't know all the work and effort that went into the behind the scenes of them, right? They just call them the puppet masters and treat them with a harsh contempt almost, right? As if they're there to ruin the game, even though they're the ones making it. It's having observed the community, the ARG community, it's a common theme that happens. But it was nice, refreshing. The community loved the Stranger Things ARG. It was just a fun little computer game. And it was, but that's the thing though, it was nothing new really. And it kind of made me feel like that old phrase where it was like, there's nothing new under the sun. And I kind of started getting bored with ARGs at that point. It seemed a bit same all the time, right? And that's where the Institute comes in. And I think you probably want to say something about it first.
Well, actually, before we get to that, you want to get into Under the Silver Lake here, right quick?
Oh, yes, yes. What Lies Under the Silver Lake? That is a great film that people need to watch. I would say it's this decade's Eyes Wide Shut. Genuinely. I really would. It's that good. But of course you have to be willing to tolerate some of the more inappropriate scenes and whatnot, but it's no different from Eyes Wide Shut, so you know. But I mean, that again, it was like it's the Eyes Wide Shut approach. It's like a person accidentally uncovers a loose thread and they pull on it and pull on it and pull on it and they have an adventure as it's going along. In Under the Silver Lake, it's real. What he discovers is real and he goes down the rabbit hole. Whereas with these ARGs, you start at the bottom of the rabbit hole almost immediately, because it's like you'll see a pamphlet taped to a wall that'll say like time camera, call this phone number. And so you start at the bottom and you slowly work out, this isn't real, as you approach the end of the ARG, right? So there's two different ways they can be structured. They can be structured to pull you in from the normal world down into a hole, or it's like a weird hole and you put your head through and kind of look around and then you're like, whatever, and you go back to the real world. And one is and both can be beneficial or negative, almost. Like, how do I put it? It depends on what the creator of the ARG wants to do to the participants. Do they want to help them? Do they want to share a good experience, leave them with a lesson? Are they trying to get money out of them? Are they trying to create a community to direct to the next project, as we'll see when we get to Oakland, California, where they kind of funnel people through ever. We'll get there. But so Under the Silver Lake, other than recommending people watch it, and it was interesting too, the aspects of it where it was almost as if his whole life had been preparing him for it. And so if I was him, I would have been feeling like, oh my God, this is all pointed. I'm the only one who would have known about the Zelda map in the Nintendo Power Book, and I'm the only one who would have known this and this and this. And that's the data set coming into play. They can craft that level of intense experience with the Cambridge Analytica, the Mercer money. They could definitely do something like that if they wanted to. And I'm sure they have. I'm sure that's what Q really is Mercer money. I wouldn't be surprised in the end.
Well, I mean, for me, one of the more interesting aspects of Under the Silver Lake, there's of course that great scene where he, kind of follows the breadcrumbs up to the one mansion, and he encounters the old guy who turns out to, what was the line? I'm the voice of your generation. I'm the voice of your grandparents' generation, your parents' generation, and all the future generations to come after you. Yes, that guy who had allegedly written all of the major hits of the last 60, 70 years or something. But anyway,
powerful scene. That was a powerful scene. I think that was the penultimate scene of the movie because it had the most to do with the manipulation of reality that we actually deal with here and now. There's a lot of evidence that, ghost writers and, ghost songwriters, all these things that there possibly is, a factory where the songs come out of and they just sort of tailor them to the artist that they're going to tell, hey, sing this. Here you go.
Yeah. Just look up Wrecking Crew, folks.
I'll have to do that too.
But one of the interesting, points that the old guy makes, I think it's him anyway, I might be mistaken, but he's talking about like the clues that the kid's been picking up on in pop culture, and he tells them specifically that they weren't meant for him. Yes. And that kind of brings up an interesting dynamic about the development of ARGs over the years. I mean, when Ong's Hat came out, it was really intended for a very specific audience, people who had a lot of reference points from the, really the 80s counterculture and some of the philosophical threads behind it, postmodernism, Dadaism, surrealism, I mean, that type of thing. people who had a certain sophistication, let us just say. And of course, later on, the ARG format started to be picked up on by the masses. I mean, really, it kind of happened to Ong's Hat at the onset of the internet age. And now suddenly you had a lot of people getting into it who didn't have those reference points. And they tended to take a much more literal interpretation of it than the previous audience would have. And I think that's maybe also kind of one of the points that Under the Silver Lake is getting to, when you kind of look at the main character, what happens to him when he does pick up on this, this game that really wasn't intended for him in the first place, and which he doesn't necessarily have the proper reference points for, and deciphering it.
And ultimately, it wasn't even a game.
Yes.
Unlike the first movie we talked about, the game itself, yeah. And so we get all these varying different views of the different possible tracks that, what did this guy call it, mixed reality can take, right? It can be real, it could be fake. I don't remember who it was, but someone fairly unpleasant, I believe, once said the best lies are the ones you can make come true. And I think a lot of that is what happened to Phil Hartman in Eyes Wide Shut, right?
Yes.
Like, you don't make a threat unless you're going to follow through on it. So
Yes.
even if you don't intend to do it by saying it, now you're stuck having to do it. So it's just an interesting thought, and it's, you have to see a lot of these different films and see them as different, not as the same thing. They're not showing you the same thing. They're showing you different versions of this mixed reality, this transmedia, this alternate reality that can be used in many different ways. It can be in your mind, like what we'll see here soon with Oakland, California. It can be in your mind, or as with Pokemon Go, or that company that guy worked for, Mind. Anyway, it was supposed to have the holographic headset for doctors, right? It can be more analog, more physical, and a screen in front of your eyes. It doesn't matter what approach they take. It's the luring in of people. It's they tickle that little mystery gene or whatever that we all have, and they lure you in. I mean, it can be good, it can be bad. It just depends on the person who's running it. And so, speaking of who's running it, now if we look at Oakland, the Oakland, California ARG, I've learned a lot more about who's running that one, and I guess I'm surprised, but not really.
Nothing really surprises me in this day and age.
No, not anymore.
So anyway, that does bring us to the main event. We're going to talk about the work of Jeff Hall, Spencer McCall, and company. They've certainly been blurring the lines between fantasy and reality for a good chunk of the last decade or so. So to start us off with, tell us about Jejune.
All right. So this was a game that ran primarily in the Oakland, California area and was specifically locked into that geographic region, whereas most of these ARGs before had been anyone who could get on the internet could access them. Sometimes there would be live events in places like for I Love Bees. There was a setup where you could go play Halo 2 before it was released, but you had to live in, this state or that state or this city. And so it left a lot of people out. This one didn't leave anyone out because it let anyone from that small area in. So it was very localized, and it seemed to work, and it kept itself tight-knit and fairly secret for the most part. And the only reason most people knew about it is because they came out with this documentary. So the Jejune Institute was the name of the ARG, the name of the company within the ARG, run by some evil cult leader who had all these patents for, healing water and ways to stop war and all these beautiful sounding things. And so these posters start going up all over California for things that, as one person puts it, seem too crazy to be real. And so people would take a little number from the flyer and they'd call, and then they'd get a call back on their cell phone telling them to go somewhere and pick up the phone. And then all of a sudden the chase would be on, and they'd have to run down the street to another phone, or go down an alleyway and into a shop and talk to the person at the shop or whatever, right? It was a little adventure. Now this
There's also
this
you gotta point out the Sasquatch, man. The Sasquatch with
Yes,
the
there was a
boombox.
dancing Sasquatch that would greet them and hand them a manila folder marked top secret or whatever, and it had the next stage of the game in it for them. Very, very entertaining, very lighthearted, obviously separate from reality until the later stages when, the Sasquatch man doesn't show up so much, and it's a bit weird. It gets a bit weirder later. But to know why this game was different from the other ones, you have to go back, and Jeff Hull, the creator of this ARG, explains it himself. He, as a child, would visit a small amusement park by his house, a fantasy, a fairy tale land, sort of like Disneyland, but based off, like the standard fairy tales, Pinocchio, all these little things. Anyway, and he would go through and they'd give you a little plastic key and you'd turn it in the display in front of each one, and the little figures would dance and they'd read a fairy tale to you. And when you left the amusement park, he would say to his parents, like, why does the fun have to stop here? Why can't it be out in the real world too? And so he wanted to bring play and imagination to people in his local community through this game. Now, so I learned about this through the Institute, the documentary that presents itself as a documentary about it. But when you watch it, you realize the documentary is being shot as part of the ARG. The people shooting it are employees of the ARG, and many of the people who are labeled as participants and guests are actually actors. And so they've seeded the crowds of participants with actors to sort of almost like a Judas goat leading the unsuspecting participants from within and from without as the puppet master of the game. Very interesting tactic there that I haven't seen before in an ARG yet. And so the movie was on Netflix for a little while, got pulled pretty instantly, but I'm a hoarder, so I kept a copy for myself. And I've watched it quite a few times. I learn a lot of new things every time I watch that documentary. What really drew me in about it was it jived with what I was learning about synchronicity at the time and weighing the concept of some supernatural reason for something happening versus, oh, it's just coincidence. Like I stubbed my toe because I wasn't paying attention to where I was walking, or did I stub my toe because I was mean to someone earlier today? And that's kind of it's a side point I think everyone needs to focus on at some point in their life. Anyway, that's what drew me in. It was still very Gnostic. It was still very occult, the whole documentary and the story it was telling. And the ARG itself was you could see Masonic undertones. You could see small occult things here and there that by themselves probably aren't very harmful, but could lead someone to more deeper things, So there was that little bit of danger, but I don't think it was a huge one with this. But in the documentary, another individual is invited in later to help them wrap it up when funding becomes a problem. Because like I said, these things don't fund themselves. So they invite a Canadian guy, Jordy Aitken, down to help them figure it out. He's a business management consultant. He does like team building exercises for companies. They hire him. He also runs a ninja training camp in Canada. Very strange. He said some interesting I would say, like some semi-Masonic things in the documentary. Kind of, I'd say he's a bit suspicious, I'd say. But I wasn't really suspicious of him or this documentary or this game at all until I heard there was an alt-right, whatever you want to call it, a far-right, whatever, internet podcaster a Canadian who offhandedly once mentioned, yeah, I was invited to go to a ninja training camp this summer, and I just stopped dead. I was like, wait, what? Like, is this that Jordy Aitken guy again? And of course, no conclusion. He never brought it up again, never mentioned it. He did disappear for a few months, so who knows? Maybe he went to ninja training camp. But I thought that was weird. Looked a bit more into Jordy Aitken, and there's an article here from Idea Mensch. Ideamensch.com. Okay, so and he says, among other things, Jordy and David co-teach at the Brookings Institute and the ACEC of Washington, D.C. So that's great. So he's a ninja, Canadian ninja who finishes people's ARGs for them and teaches at the Brookings Institute. All right, then. Sounds great, doesn't it? Sounds like a real... sounds like we might have a bit of a story here. So
Mildly.
yeah, and he graduated with a degree. I can't find it right now, but he had somewhere a degree from the University of Vancouver or something in neurolinguistic programming, I believe. Go figure. I can find the quote.
Oh, that's interesting. Especially because the the chick, the number 2 chick in Nexium, Nancy Salzman, I believe, was one of the big neurolinguistic programmers in the United States.
Oh, really? Interesting. Well, let me just see. I can find this quote here really quickly. I will find it for you because I don't want to misquote or say anything wrong, mislead anyone here.
It's kind of interesting, of course. The one prominent filmmaker who was involved with Nexium, Mark Vincente, had earlier been involved with Jay-Z Knight and
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm sure, as you know, Jay-Z Knight later kind of became like a Q supporter. So yeah, it's kind of interesting when you see how incestuous this whole network was. Of course, the Brofman family had provided support for Nexium, as I alluded to earlier. They had given money to Einhorn, the so-called unicorn, and his whole network. That, I mean, was tied in with Andrina Puharich and a lot of these other guys.
Oh my lord, that's a deep one. I'm gonna have to go look that up a bunch now. I got the quote right here. It says, Jordy Aitken, who joined his father's company 10 years ago after graduating from University of British Columbia, where he studied, aptly enough, rhetoric and later neuro-linguistic programming. So there you go. So he's an expert in neuro-linguistic programming, teaches at, Brookings Institute, runs a ninja camp. And then I'm hearing all these like alt-right internet people being like, oh, I was invited to a ninja camp. Gee, I wonder what's going on. I'm sure it could be another ninja camp, but, am I wrong in wondering if it's the same guy, maybe?
Another interesting thing about that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the mercenary firm Executive Outcomes.
No.
It was a South African venture, and you've heard of the movie Blood Diamond, right, with Leonardo DiCaprio? Okay, that was loosely based on the exploits of Executive Outcome. They were the private military company that was sent into Sierra Leone, and gosh, I think they went in with like maybe 100 mercenaries or something, and basically defeated Liberia's like entire army. But yeah, those guys were very elite. They were mostly veterans of the 32nd Battalion. But anyway, when Executive Outcomes had been set up originally, one of the founders was a guy named Barlow, I believe. He had been a spook, special operator for the South African Defense Force, that type of thing. But the other guy who he'd originally set it up with was actually a specialist in neuro-linguistic programming. And one of their first contracts was to come up with a training program for neuro-linguistic programming for the South African Special Forces. So yeah, there was kind of this interesting tie within LP, an Executive Outcome, and this whole sort of special forces culture in South Africa that I had recently uncovered. So it's kind of fascinating to see it showing up here in the context of a ninja camp.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? There's a lot of, and makes me think too of the cyber warrior schools or Bannon's gladiator school.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, certainly,
Teaching
I was
people
going
to
to
be a
say
better
John
internet
Alexander
warrior.
too. Now that I'm remembering, also, I think it was John Alexander, Colonel John Alexander, had also promoted NLP as well within the armed forces. So yeah, and especially within the kind of special forces community in a few countries, at least, it seems like there was some support for this. But it's not surprising. I mean, for those of you who aren't really aware, at its most basic form, NLP is kind of like a Jedi mind trick or something like that. Of course, we've all seen that the famous scene from A New Hope, where that he goes through the whole Obi-Wan Kenobi does the whole "these are not the droids you're looking for" thing. I mean, that's kind of roughly based on NLP and how it would work. It's a kind of hypnosis almost. You would effectively mirror the actions of somebody, the type of voice they're using. You would kind of lull them into just a really bland conversation about the weather or something like that, and then maybe you would casually mention, "You will give me $20 now," or something like that in the midst of the conversation, and then go back to talking about, if whether or not it's going to rain the next day or something like that. I mean, it sounds strange, but I think somebody actually did NLP on me once, way back when I was working at 7-Eleven when I was like a teenager at the cash register. But yeah, I mean, they kind of came in. We were just having this really inconsequential conversation, and then in the middle of it they were just kind of like, "You will let me have my cup of coffee for free?" And yeah, I didn't ring up the thing. It was like the strangest thing ever, and as soon as they left too, immediately I was like, why the heck did I not ring up the guy's coffee? But yeah, I definitely think it works.
Very interesting. Wow. Okay. Wow. So a whole new thing for me to delve into as well. They're excellent. I was gonna cover. There's a lot of occult. In this circle, there's a lot of occult references in the articles talking about the creation of these Oakland games, because there was the Jejune Institute, which eventually flopped. Well, it didn't flop. They closed it out with that ninja training guy, his help. They then started another one called the Latitude Society, and they started a company which managed it. So a company called FOMA, FOMA, was the company that created the Latitude ARG, and it was again a local San Francisco, Oakland area thing. It was basically like fancy meeting rooms hidden away in the city, and you could swipe cards and go in and chat, and it was almost like a cigar club, a secret cigar club for anyone who was invited. And again, though, they started having money problems, so they had to charge people to get in, and that's when it all started to fall apart. And the guy, Jeff Hull, the creator, had to again call Jordy Aitken, the ninja, to come save him and save his creation here. They made a documentary about that one as well that's available on Amazon Prime right now called In Bright Axiom, which is actually, I really enjoyed that one too. So the Institute was about the Jejune Institute, and In Bright Axiom is about the Latitude Society, the two different ARGs that this Jeff Hull guy has made. Both of the documentaries are filmed by a guy called Spencer McCall, and he presents himself as independent of the ARGs, but he's not. He is the employee of these companies that have been making them. So the documentary is filmed almost in a meta way, in that it pretends it's not part of it at all, when it's just it pretends the documentary is exposing the ARG when the documentary is part of the ARG, both times, In Bright Axiom and the Institute. It's a very interesting way of, and this is what I'm talking about, how this Institute one really blurred the lines, the Latitude Society even more, because the Latitude Society had things where it was like, drive out into the countryside, or get into the back of this car and this guy will drive you where you're going. And there's a very out of your hands feel to these ones that made it feel far more real to the participants. A lot of people were worried it was really a cult and they were really going to get kidnapped and stuff. So there was real fear for some of these people. Some people developed issues. And one of the actors, I might add, in the Institute, his face was covered, like the lights were off, so you couldn't see his face. And he claimed that he was in a wheelchair, and that all he could do was stay inside and play the game on his computer. I recognized his voice in the In Bright Axiom documentary. And in it, his face isn't blurred, and he stands up out of his chair in it. So even the person who's like, I'm a participant and I'm in a wheelchair and my face is blacked out because I'm afraid of people coming after me, even he's an actor. Even that was an act. So it's layers of ARGs on top of ARGs, almost, seeing how how like an onion, how many layers it goes down. I don't know. I don't. Maybe the company itself is an ARG, and if you investigate FOMA, you'll get taken off on an ARG journey. Who knows, right? Who knows with these people?
All right,
But,
so
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, last note on Spencer McCall. As a side note, there's one other thing he's known well for, and that's appearing on Tucker Carlson Tonight in 2020 on the 15th of July. It's just interesting.
Oh, really?
You know, how do you go from that to appearing on Tucker Carlson's? I don't get it.
Yeah, that
But
is
hey,
interesting.
you know, networks, you know, friends, networks of friends, and you know, it's the big boys club, and none of us are part of it, so we don't see how could he get that job? Well, you know, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3 phone call, right?
All right, so what about dispatches from elsewhere?
Ah, okay. So this is the television, the fictional television show representation of the experience of the participants. It's essentially the same as the documentary, but you know, it's an actual TV show. They're not breaking the fourth wall. They're not talking to the camera. They're not talking to you, the audience. You're just watching. Jason Segel, the actor Jason
Well,
Segel, I think,
actually, they do sort of have that narration, at the beginning of each
behind
episode. You
it.
were Simone. You were,
Yes.
so I mean, they do kind of try to.
They try to pull you in with that, and not to mention the reveal right at the end, and how it's Jason Segal's own personal interpretation of it. I wonder if he actually participated in this event or if he simply saw the film The Institute like I did, because he had a very similar, I feel I had a very similar interpretation of it to him, in that it was simply an experience to be had, not real, but it could be more if you made it more. So for instance, watching The Institute, I learned a lot about what they called nonchalance, which is they say it's represented by the hung fool tarot card hanging there foolishly by the skin of his, his own his little toe or whatever. And they basically describe synchronicity as nonchalance, not caring, knowing what you're doing and kind of just going about your day, and all the pieces will fit in as you go. And I've long felt like that's uh, uh, it works. I personally, for me, it seems to work. And so I was really enamored with that. And for me, I was able to draw meaning from that fictional creation and mold it and make it into what I wanted it to be. And I took that from it. Other people may not have that. Like, I mean, if you had schizophrenia or something, you might have real trouble working through whether this was real or not. Like the Halo 2 one, the Halo 2 one's fine. It says, Halo 2, Microsoft right on it. You know what it is. This one, you're in cult land and you see cult signs, and then this phone call, and then it's like, get in the car. And you could see how the experience may not be positive for everyone now. And that's how I relate it back, would go full circle back to the game. You got to put yourself in his shoes in the game and ask yourself, if you experienced all of that stuff, and at the end, you fall through the skylight and everyone's there cheering you on, all your friends and family, and you're like, would you ever be able to trust anyone again? Is it possible that all of these ARGs and all of this technology and all of these data sets and all this planning and all the work that's gone into transmedia, is it really just for marketing, or is it about atomization and separation and inversion and fantasy? And as one person in Bright Axiom puts it, giving people permission to brainwash themselves. Because if we know much about the elite, it's that they like it when we choose to do it on our own. They don't want to force it because they believe, I don't know, they maybe believe in some kind of karmic responsibility or something, right? A lot of us have seen that kind of material in the conspiracy realm, that maybe they know a bit more and they don't like to do the crime themselves. They like to convince us to do it. So an ARG is perfect. You brainwash yourself. In the words of the participant themselves, I was given permission to brainwash myself, and I did. Great. That's what society needs, right?
It's kind of interesting too. Another influence on ARGs was the no, I believe he was a psychiatrist, Abraham Maslow, I believe. He kind of coined the whole concept of the peak experience, essentially, which was a kind of altered state of conscious or euphoria, that was brought about when you had achieved a point of self-actualization. And I think that was, at least part of the, purpose, especially of the early ARGs, was to get people to kind of experience that, peak feeling. But unfortunately, a lot of times, that tends to come about through a kind of traumatic event of some kind or other.
Yeah. And it never lasts. And that's another thing the participants always said. They always said they were chasing that feeling and they never wanted it to go away. And then when the ARG shut down, they felt like part of them had died. People become really invested in this stuff, and it can be damaging,
it's
to shut it down. And sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I would kind of equate that, because I was a metalhead, throughout a lot of my teens, 20s, I suppose to some extent I still am, but, certainly growing up, I was part of the whole, the story death metal scene in Florida, and that was definitely a very intense environment, that was definitely, I think, for me, a kind of peak experience, and it certainly was for a lot of the other people who were involved in it, and it was something that a lot of people were chasing after for the rest of their life, and this did not always end well for some of those guys. And I know Chris Knowles, he kind of came up in the hardcore scene, Boston and thereabouts, and he kind of reported some similar things with some of his mates. So yeah, I mean, just, when you're kind of a part of that sort of intensity, it's something that you almost inevitably chase after for the rest of your life. And unless you can find something constructive to fill the void with, I mean, in all honesty, what I do now is kind of that attempt to, fill the void. It can really drive you mad and lead you down to some very destructive behavior.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. It's and it's unfortunate too that a lot of the, how do I put it? A lot of the people affected by it, they'll go on and they'll do their own thing. It's almost like one ARG ends up creating 5 more after it. Out of the people who enjoyed it, a couple will go make their own, and it's sort of self-perpetuating almost. For the peak, the idea of the peak experience too, of course, I mean, you've got the ultimate sort of transhumanist model of that would be, like sharing memories, things like that they talk about in things like Black Mirror as well. And Black Mirror, even there's a few episodes that have to do with the melding of reality and fantasy, or mixed reality, or whatever we want to call it, right? But when it comes down to it, there's like, I found a few articles, a friend of mine found quite a few articles about the creation of these Oakland ARGs. And it's some of the phrases that some of the people say, when they think they're just being interviewed for a magazine, they'll say things like this. And he points me to 3 doors. 2 are labeled dark and crawling, and 1 is labeled light and walking. Very strange sort of overtones here. Someone asked them, where does the name of your company FOMA come from? Someone says, it's a tenet of Bokonoism, the religion Kurt Vonnegut invented for Cat's Cradle. And what does it mean? He says, and Uriah, who's one of the employees, I believe he did the music for this. Or, no, sorry, not the music, set design for these ARGs. He says, it means harmless untruths. Harmless untruths. Interesting. Later, someone is quoted as saying, my dad was an undercover FBI agent. Anthony says, that's one. And then Uriah chimes in laughing, some about Burning Man. Anyways, here it is. He describes that time in his life as a period of weirdness in which he picked up secret societies like Loose Change. That's how he met Uriah. So obviously they've got, it says, for 7.5 years, I worked on secret societies, eventually as a lead producer. Like, these people are of the scene. They know what they're doing, right? And they're introducing other people to that occult Oakland scene. You can see it in Bright Axiom. They invite the best participants out to a dinner in the middle of a forest, and the ninja training guy comes out and says, "You have been chosen to be new alchemists." It's very new agey, very, very suspicious to me, at least. So it seems like they're not propagating new ageism, but they're propagating the mechanism of ARGs and interactive media, which is, of course, the next evolution. Like, you've got books, you've got movies, then you've got video games where you're kind of in control of the movie. And then now you're getting these ARGs where you're in the movie, right?
Real quick, who was the girl who was allegedly like the inspiration for divine nonchalance and all that stuff? Gosh, I can't remember.
Right, her name was Ava Lucien. Lucien, and it's funny because think about that name.
Was she real? Have they been?
No, but she was. According to Jeff Hull, he did have a friend with that same story, that she was, she stayed at their parents' house and eventually she did kill herself and stuff. So, but it's not, Ava Lucien was not real. It was just based off a childhood person that he had known that he never seems to name. I can't ever find anywhere he lists who it was, but that's what he claims.
I always thought that was interesting because supposedly she died in 1988, I believe, which was the year that Ong's hat was launched.
Oh, interesting. But even the name, think of even the name, Ava Lucien. Like, what was the song? Ave Maria or something? Well, this is like Ave Lucien or something. Like there's very antagonistic tones to most of these things, right? And you can see who they're directed at. It's pretty clear to tell what kind of community they're supposed to antagonize, and the kind that, like, for the Blair Witch Project, if that, like, they'd made that ARG, who's that going to attract? People who think they're witches, goths, emos, right? Like, to use the terminology of the time of the 90s there. Don't want to offend anyone or anything, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's basically what you see, in the second Blair Witch Block of Shadows. I mean, the people that are going out, for the Blair Witch tours, I mean, yeah, they're pretty much all in that kind of...
It's the audience you'd expect.
Yeah.
So, but this was wider open, like the I Love Bees was just for Halo. AI, or the Beast, was just for the movie. Lost is just for Lost. This was general. This was just in the streets. This was anyone. And so my theory of secret societies, like the Masons and all these other groups, is that they act like a sorting machine. You put all your change in a machine and there's all those different sized holes, and they sort the change by just shaking them, and they all fit in their little layer there, and they don't go through the smaller hole. That's secret societies. You join the Masons, they'll shake you, they'll see if you do the rituals the way they want it, and then they'll invite you into the next layer. And if you do well there, maybe you'll get to go to the next one. And so a lot of these ARGs could even function that same way as well. Just like they did with the, the forest dinner I told you about, where they were like, "You are the new alchemists." Yeah, that's probably step one of being sorted, right? They're just sorting through people. And if you think about it too, so you put up an advertisement for, the time camera or the personal force field. The only people who are going to rip off that little tag and call your number are people... how do I put it? Like, how do I describe it? Sorry. It's like why would they want to meet a dull person, almost, right? So it's the point is that the imagery is antagonistic and mystic, and the only person it won't attract is someone they wouldn't want to meet anyway. So it's the perfect first layer of sorting, right?
Oh yeah, where you're trying to specifically, I think, engage people with the certain type of reference points that you would want for this, type of operation.
Yeah, the bait has to match the fish you're looking for, but they were making the bait as general as possible. Are you curious and open-minded? or not, right? Whereas before it was like, do you like Halo? Do you like this movie? Do you like Lost? Do you wish you were a witch? Like, right? There were requirements to getting into the other arcs. This one was just, do you have any curiosity left in your bones at all or not?
Well, it kind of reminds me of a point that Bruno, of course, the infamous or famous, depending upon your point of view, Renaissance magician who was burned at the stake in the year 700. Bruno, one of the points that he had made for magic to be effective was that both the magician and the audience must implicitly believe in what the magician is doing. So kind of first step, I mean, you need to make sure to begin with that the audience that you're acquiring for this type of thing believes. That's the important first.
Yeah, you don't want a skeptic in your audience picking you apart at every turn. Asking hard questions. So just to wrap this up really quickly, I wanted to cover, so most ARGs die because of money, and these Oakland ARGs are no different. So I wanted to know, how did Jeff Hull afford to do all this? Who is he? And all I could find out was a quote of him saying, through a series of circumstances, I became independently wealthy. That's not good enough for me. So I had to look more. And thanks to a good pal, Cooper, out there, if you salute to you if you're out there, Cooper, he found, well, first of all, I found the Hull Trading Company, which is his dad's company. That's where he was employed. The Hull Trading Company is an American business company founded by American investor Blair Hull in 1985. It was an independent algorithmic trading firm. Okay, you scroll down a little bit. In 1999, he sold the Hull Trading Company to Goldman Sachs for $531 million. So that's how he became independently wealthy. And when you go and you look a little bit further, just a little bit further, just in his Wikipedia page, Hull developed proprietary and large-scale reliable distributed system architecture, providing automatic real-time pricing, risk management, market making, interconnection, blah, blah, blah. He basically invented e-commerce and, like microsecond transactions and digital derivatives and all this stuff. He created almost all of it. His dad.
Wow.
So he sold it to Goldman Sachs for $531 million. So that's how, he probably gave his son some of that money, and that's how he runs these ARGs. And I'm trying really hard not to pass judgment on Jeff Hull right now, but in Bright Axiom, the interview with him takes place in his bedroom where he has bunk beds, and he's wearing a paper crown, and he's wearing a fuzzy bear pajamas. And the guy's
are you trying
like
to politely
50.
say that he has no real concept of reality for what it is for normal people?
I'm not sure the guy ever grew up, frankly. But that's not for me to judge. I've only seen him in a few clips. He's a very private and reclusive person. He's given a TED Talk on ARGs, which was very interesting. I think it was TEDx. It wasn't the big one, but that was decent. But so his father was the equity options market maker. He is one of the, where was it? His computers trade stocks faster than the human eye can see them on a screen. The system is designed to predict patterns that will unfold over periods as short as 2 minutes. In a business that isn't normally modest about its savvy, Hull and his automated trading shop are the envy of Wall Street, Worth magazine. So there's that. So it all ties together,
Yeah.
It's funny.
I
just wanted to say my main problem with all of this, and the backlash that he got for merging reality and fiction and not letting the audience know this wasn't a real California cult, goes all the way back to Cannibal Holocaust, where they couldn't tell if people had been murdered for this movie or not, right? It's sort of like the penultimate. You realize you've reached the apex of your genre when people don't even know what's going on anymore, right?
No, I mean it definitely sets some unsettling precedents as well. So, I mean, to wrap up, do you see this type of thing, essentially continuing going forward? I mean, of McCall and Hull, I mean, it kind of seems like in some ways they've started a new medium with June and the tie-ins. Are more filmmakers going to emulate this stuff? And especially like
Yeah.
with technology like virtual reality or something like that. I mean, where could it go from here?
Well, and I mean, I even I'm loath to name it, but that 3301 ARG, they were supposed to be having a film made about it, so it's kind of already begun, really. It's not going to go anywhere. It's a potent, like I said, it's the next step in the storytelling evolution. Books, movies, video games, this transmedia. So it's like, you read the book, you have to imagine it. Oh, now I can just watch it on the screen. I don't have to imagine it. Oh, now I'm and they play video games. Oh, now I'm controlling the main character. And then with this, it's like, oh, I am a character inside the story now. It's the next evolution. It's not going anywhere, but it will evolve away from this eventually when you get more technologically, you get HoloLenses or whatever, and it'll probably end with some kind of Black Mirror sharing memories, like, oh, I'll upload my memories for $5 and I'll turn them into a non-fungible token, which is funny because there was a Wizards of the Coast. Oh no, sorry, not Wizards of the Coast. Topps, the trading card company from earlier that I was talking about, they actually just announced in March 2020, Topps announced a collaboration with Wax.io to make their cards tradable on the blockchain. As of December 2020, Topps has only made Garbage Pail Kids cards available on the blockchain, but they have announced that other collectibles will be coming soon. So they've already stepped into the non-fungible tokens market. And of course, this is the company that's owned by Disney, by Eisner's holding company, Tourant, or whatever it's called, the Tournant company. And then, of course, what I just mentioned, that Garbage Pail Kids, that's that hideous set of cards or whatever with like Donald Trump and the Illuminati and stuff. And it's making fun of, it, really. It's a poke in the eye to people who believe, and it makes a joke out of it to people who don't. And it further divides people more and more, right? That's what everything they're doing is about, is atomizing people, splitting people up, putting boundaries and barriers in between people with words, with labels, with perception itself now. There's almost, one person said, has the Overton window shifted left or right? And in reality, it's broken into two. It's now acceptable to be extremely right or extremely left, and not in the middle anymore, right? You have to pick a side. So you can see the atomization occurring, the ARG atomization, where you divorce someone from reality so hard that not only do they not know what's going on while they're playing, but like the game, it's like, could you ever be the same afterwards either? And that's why I ask, how do you control who gets these experiences? Do you know if the right person is getting the experience or not? And who's responsible for any damage? Like in Bright Axiom, they even joke about it. They say, when you join the ARG, you have to sign a waiver that dismisses the company from any, what was it, frees them from any damage, any spiritual damage you may incur on this ARG. Like, are you kidding me? They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing is dangerous, and they just like absolve themselves with the small print. It's kind of scummy, to be honest. But so I don't see it going anywhere. I see it evolving. I see it getting worse, especially if Q is an operation, right? Because that would be light years beyond the Jejune and stuff, the Jejune Institute and whatnot. So, man, it's tricky. It's tricky, and there's no regulations. There's no way you can regulate it. It's, some people just say, oh, it's art. You can't regulate the art, right?
Yeah, I mean, it does raise a lot of complicated questions, no doubt.
Pandora's box.
you know, because I mean, certainly, I mean, I think to some extent, you know, people like us have probably benefited in some ways from these type of things. But I mean, obviously, you know,
100%.
certain part of the population, I mean, just is not equipped for this type of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think we're probably seeing what happens with that, especially with Q right now, where there is
Mm-hmm.
no responsibility whatsoever. And worse, I mean, it's, you know, being phenomenally manipulated by forces within the intelligence community and the military. You know,
Yeah, and you have the joke is like MAGA coalitions like we're gonna sue Q. Yeah, good luck with that, right? Like there's no one to sue, guys. Good job.
well, not only
So
that,
there's
but I mean, a lot of the people that potentially within the Q thing, they specialize in frivolous lawsuits. So,
yes,
I,
yes,
I would not want to start getting into a legal quagmire
with
with any
them.
of those people.
No, no.
That's, yeah,
I think
that's not wise.
no, but I think the key thing here, the key thing we have to note about this is first of all, yes, who holds the responsibility for what happens to people in this? Did they sign a waiver? Did they not? You know, what's going on here? Um, it reminds me of a quote. ARGs remind me of a quote from Game of Thrones from the first episode back when Ned Stark was still alive, back when the show was good. And he says, the madman sees what he sees, right? Like, even if you see an hallucination of a beetle walking on your wall, it's still real to you. You still saw it, right? If you know it's a hallucination, then you can divorce yourself. But so with the ARG, it's like, it is real. It is real, even though it's just a constructed experience. It's real to the participant, and the effects on them are real. And you know, the other guy's just sitting there thinking, "Oh, how can I grow my pocketbook off these people playing my game?" It's unfortunate, but I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, that's what typically happens when money
Mm.
starts to flow into anything.
Yes, you can see it in gaming, especially now, how it's all become about microtransactions and loot boxes and you know they never ship anything finished anymore because they don't have to because they know people will buy it even if it's trash. So I think the final thing I wanted to say was that the main thing the ARG is playing on here, there was a meme and it was about Q, and it was Butters from South Park and a bunch of kids in front of the school, and they all had photoshopped like Q t-shirts on and stuff. And the quote was, I just wanted to get out of my house. I just wanted to get out of my house and do something. And it's like lockdown is the perfect timing to tap into that, right? That's what Q is. It's like people wanted to get out of their house. Well, let's go protest the government or whatever, right? Take down the pizza shop or whatever, you know? They're literally boring people into the hands of the ARGs.
Yeah, well, I mean, you see, just I mean, all kinds of offshoots too. I mean, also, you know, you had the Randonautica app that kind of came out as
Mm-hmm.
well. You know, which is another interesting development. Right as the lockdowns were really coming out. I mean, that's another thing where you've got people going around essentially looking for synchronicities and these other kind
Yeah,
of
and
experiences.
if you're looking for it, you're definitely going to find it. And this is what I said, you know, you have to draw the line between what is a coincidence and what do you, like, you personally, you the listener, what do you believe is a coincidence and what do you not believe is a coincidence? That's really all you have to ask yourself, right? Where do you draw the line?
This is actually something I was talking about earlier with my research partner, Keith Allen Dennis, too. But I mean, it's also sort of like with synchronicity. I mean, you could maybe even divide them into separate categories of, you know, sort of truly random, spontaneous synchronicity, or, you know, the kind of synchronicity that you're kind of consciously generating by focusing on
Yes,
something.
yes. Where you think of someone and then they call. That's sort of like the generated synchronicity, whereas there is completely random ones as well. Yes, and and of course the Randonautica app, people are going out looking for it, so it's going to stand out. It's that, whatever they call it, where you, the observer bias or whatever, where you're looking for it. I, you know, it's just like anything. It's just like everything else. You know, it's fun. It can be lighthearted. It can be a good experience if it's crafted well and run by well-meaning people, or it can be weaponized. You know, just like anything, like a hammer. A hammer can build a house, or it can do much worse things. You know, it's just a tool. that we have to learn how to apply.
Absolutely, and certainly get more well-meaning and well-intentioned people involved in this. Certainly, it
Yeah.
seems like we're getting to the point now where a lot of the grifters and hucksters are starting to move in force. You know, I don't. If you don't have anything else to add, I guess this is a good point to wrap up, then, sir.
Yeah, I think that's been pretty good. We went over all the different movies. I mean, it's like one big circle, and it seems to end with, you know, the idea that, oh, ARGs aren't going anywhere. They work too well.
Oh yeah. Well,
Keep your guard up, you know.
certainly, I think QAnon has proven that beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Oh, Lord Almighty! And then they've got that new one that they're pushing. The how do I put it? The new version of Q, where they've got their new savior with their magical sword from
Oh yeah, yeah,
Atlantis.
yeah.
Oh my goodness,
We'll
man!
hopefully be talking about that pretty soon.
I hope so too. Yes, hopefully with John, and we'll do a show and get us both on there for that, because that is a hoot.
Yeah. All right, folks. On that note, I'm going to wrap up for now. As always, thank you guys for listening, and good night and good luck to you all.